Hello. I have to admit that I'm not quite sure how to say your name. Um, I've kind of in my head just been calling you Isaiah, and I know that's not right. So please forgive me for not knowing how to pronounce your name. Maybe I'll just call you Sister Garcia um, for this critique. But hello. um, so I was just looking at what you said submitted here for your color comp. Um, and I don't know if you realize, if you know who Piet Mondrian is, but he is an artist that has a style very similar to this. And it almost feels like you are, just taking his style and changing it a little bit and making it your own. And I want to discourage you from doing that. It's okay to look at other people's work, and admire it and uh, think, and even like use it for inspiration. Um, and I think if you break the mold a little bit more than you have, then it would be okay to do that. Um, but for the case of this assignment, it doesn't quite meet the parameters of the assignment um, as well. And so I want you to reconsider how you're looking at your final composition. I just pulled up Mondrian and some of his work. So as you can see, it's very similar to what you have going on with the black and white lines and then filled in with some color. Um, let's see, I think there's something down here I was going to show you, but I could be wrong. Um, but I think what you're going to want to do, if you decide to go with this design, you need to look at the rubric. Um, and you'll see pretty quickly how maybe this isn't the best choice for the design unless you alter it quite a bit. Required media acrylic, you did that. Subject matter flat, not modeled, yes. Obvious color scheme with no black or white. So you've got a lot of white spaces and you've got some black. And it's okay to use it as accents. In fact, I would even accept this work if you had a little bit more variety in the thickness and thinness of these lines and you didn't uh, and you had other colors like in here as well, as far as instead of relying solely on black and white for those lines. Um, one thing, if you wanted to keep this design, if you're set on something like this, you might want to consider breaking the mold a little bit more, adding something else to the design that makes it not look quite so Mondrian. um, maybe you add some other shapes that come in. Let's say you have a circle shape over here that you change and make a focal point. But it would require quite a bit of change, and then you just had some of these elements as background work. But like I want you to consider adding more variation. Even if you kept the design simple like this, I would want to see more. Right now, all the lines are the same thicknesses, they're the same colors, even the shapes are the same width. And so I'd want to see you push that a little bit further and see what you can come up with. And it's okay to do non-representational, and I think that's great, especially in a class like this. But reconsider what you would want to submit for this design. Effective use of color saturation, I want you to save your most saturated color for the focal point and then desaturate some of the other colors. Um, let's see, use emphasis to create a center of interest. You need to think about, what do I want the viewer to look at first, and then have some dominance and subordination that you do with value, contrast, with saturation, contrast, um, things like that. So, and then adding you got nice repetition. That's really, really good. Your focal point needs to be within the rule of thirds. In this design, perhaps the red would be your focal point. Uh, Mostly, like this one is a little bit harder to tell, but this one, because the blue and the blue, this blue is close to the background, so that's subordinating this one, and this one is less saturated, so that's subordinating that color and that shape. So on this one, you've got, you know, the red and even the white, because of the black and white contrast, kind of become your focal point. And so I want you to think about your focal point and then your placement of your focal point within the rule of thirds. You know, this one, it would have been better maybe to have the white, you know, the if you know, you can't use white on a major design shape for this assignment, but if you could, if you had the white shape right here, because then that would keep your eye from going off the edge of the design and keep it within the rule within the rule of thirds. I'm sorry, I've got a cold. Small, medium, and large shapes, I think you did fairly well with that. You've got some large shapes, you know, some small shapes, and some medium-sized shapes. Um, Used a strong contrast, value contrast. You've got some good value contrast going on. Overlapping shapes, that's something that is missing in this design. Like I said, I think if you came in and changed it and it had some shapes that overlapped, right now there, it's kind of like a grid that you've created without any overlapping shapes. So as you can see with this design, um, just simply because of what we've covered this semester and what we're looking for on the final, what I'm looking for on the final exam, um, that this design may not fit the parameters of the requirements for the final. And so I want you to keep that in mind without a major overhaul of this design. Um, it is possible, and it is, you know, it wouldn't take a lot of work to change it up, but it would take some rethinking and not and breaking out the parameters of the Mondrian style. Okay, and then I saw this one that you submitted, and this one, it's a nice design. It's a nice beginning to a design. It does need additional work, you know, similar to this one, and we'll kind of just briefly go over this design as well in case you decide to change it up. Okay, a few things on this design. First of all, I'm going to mention color. I want you to, for this class, for the final, we're trying to find out how you're able to use a traditional color scheme, and if you're able to do that and mix harmonious colors. And so again, you're going to need to limit your use of black, white, and gray on major shapes. And so black is a big element in this design, so I would want you to figure out, you know, yellow and blue. If you kept those colors, you know, you could do yellow, green, blue, and it would be analogous. You could go red, yellow, blue, and it would be triadic. And so I want you to think about that first of all. Then next, rule of thirds. You've done a nice thing here with how you've broken up this composition. I think, you know, this is roughly within the rule of thirds. The golden section, you know, could possibly come down just a little bit, the horizon line on this design. And then, so that would be, you know, another thing. So what you need to think about with a design like this is placement of a focal point. So because it is a linear perspective design and you've got these diagonal lines coming in, I understand they're telephone wires and you're looking down a road. But as far as the design goes, you're kind of creating like an X in your design. Do you see that? With these lines and with those lines, and it's kind of like X marks the spot. And so you're forcing the viewer to look down this road at this design. And so you want to have something interesting there for the viewer to look at. If you were to stick with this design. But for this design, you need to have your focal point within the rule of thirds. And so right now it's kind of like in the center, is, you know, it's broken in thirds this way, but it's not, it would need to be kind of over this way or this way. And it's a little bit difficult to do that when you have these diagonal lines that are leading your eye right to the center of the design. You could experiment with shifting over the design the linear perspective of the design so that your focal point is off center um, a little bit, or you could experiment with creating some kind of focal point within the design that becomes dominant over this. So it would have to be a pretty strong focal point to become dominant over leading your eye down in this other direction. That could be a subordinate way. You can do that with contrast. If you had a very highly saturated, highly value contrast focal point, and then you decreased the contrast in these other shapes, that would help and make this not so prominent and give more dominance to a shape that you have going on. I would keep your focal point in the foreground, not in the background. Right now, it kind of draws you in, and then you've got the sun shape back there, and so everything's drawing you into the background, but there's not a whole lot going on in the foreground. Um, and so I want you to consider that. So I'm going to close this rubric for a minute. And I just opened up some linear perspective, and I just wanted to show you, kind of how when you have this linear perspective that comes in, and it draws your eye right down the center of the design, you can't help but look at where all these lines intersect right there. So, I mean, I pulled up this design that's similar to what you have going on. There's another one down here of the same thing. But you see how they kind of put at least something interesting. But then they have other elements going on in the design um, that at least the viewer's eye is able to bounce around and see some other interesting elements like this tree shape over here. Notice how the colors and the values are very similar, which makes it subordinate. These actually become a little bit more prominent, these darker shapes, because they are a darker value against this lighter value that you have going on here. Even these, your eye comes forward to see what these bushes are, and so you're not drawn, you're definitely drawn in to look at this, these where these lines converge, but you have other things within the design to look at. Another thing that you could consider with a design like this, where did it go? I feel like I skipped it. Where is it? Is, something like this that leads your eye. You're still using the linear perspective, but it's bringing the focal point over into, at least into the area of the rule of thirds. You've got this that's leading your eye this way, and then the sailboat is, tip for this design, to meet the parameters of this design. This, you don't want to move the sailboat maybe up in here, but just to meet the parameters of the design. But you see how that still creates a really nice feel in the design. It's not quite so forceful for the viewer to look right down into the center of the design as you see something like this. Even this has more going on, along, besides what's just leading your eye in. As far as design goes, it's probably not, they're kind of fun photos and fun way to demonstrate your knowledge of linear perspective. This one, they've got some car shapes. Imagine if you add some nice color to this and you had a highly saturated red for this car shape, but you're able to use a less saturated, maybe you had a blue and a desaturated green on this foliage, and then had some more saturated colors up here in the front. How you would have, your eye would be drawn to these foreground shapes and not be so sucked in to the back of the design. So I know that's probably a lot to take in. Where are you at? Well, don't look at that. But that's kind of where you are with the design. So I would recommend, if you were to do something like that, somehow subordinate these colors, values, so they're not so dominant, adding some other elements in the foreground, making sure that your focal point is within the rule of thirds, and that really draws your attention. And then limit your use of black, white, and gray. Sister Garcia, I have appreciated you in this class. I've loved your desire and your hard work to learn this semester. It's been very inspiring, and I think it's been inspiring. It's been inspiring for me to see you work so hard, and I think you